UFC Fight Night Moraes vs. Sandhagen is over, and this was a really exciting night. We saw a bunch of people making their UFC debuts, several people coming over from Contender Series, a couple of undefeated fighters. This fight certainly delivered. Let's jump right into it. Here's my real winners and losers of UFC Fight Night Moraes vs. Sandhagen. We opened the night in the flyweight division with a fight between Bruno Silva and Ulembekov. Ulembekov debuts in the UFC as a 500 favorite, which is pretty crazy. He's from Dagestan and is closely associated with the 155-pound champ. Khabib is so revered that it seems that if you look like him, fight like him, and your name is pronounced like his, then big things are expected. Ulembekov's arrival was indeed anticipated, but even as a 500 favorite, this was no walk in the park. In fact, he probably won't be doing any park walking for a few days. Bruno Silva started this fight with some nasty leg kicks and won the first round in the eyes of two judges. He landed some good strikes and even snuck in a spinning back fist. I also thought Bruno won the first round, but he did lose the last two. In the end, it was Ulembekov who had the most success. His body clinch takedowns were pretty good, his hands were pretty solid, and like his feathered brethren, that was an eagle reference, he showed toughness and a real knowledge of the Dagestani handcuff. Bruno Silva drops his third fight in a row and is now 0-3 in the UFC. Predating the UFC, he is 2-4 in his last 6 and is on the wrong side of 30. As an undersized flyweight, time may be running out on the Brazilian shorty, so I think I'm going to have to put old Bruno Silva on the losers list. Ulembekov wins his UFC debut and increases his record to an impressive 13-1, but with odds like this, you kind of expect him to have an easier time. Ulembekov looked good, but I've got pretty high standards for my real winners list, and he doesn't quite cut it here. So let's move on, there's no real winners here. Next up is a women's bantamweight bout between Tracy Cortez and Stephanie Egger. Cortez wins this one by unanimous decision. Tracy looked good in this fight and honestly had a fairly dominant performance. She got several takedowns, largely controlled position, and put several strikes on her downed opponent. But altogether, this was a pretty slow ground-based grappling match. We've got several decisions on this card, and most of them were pretty exciting, so no one's going to blame you if you decide to skip this one. The strikes didn't seem to damage Stephanie very much, and Tracy was never really in a position to find a submission. The most exciting parts of this fight were an eager upkick and Tracy's eyelashes. Like seriously, those eyelashes are impressive. Tracy shows us that she is a legit competitor with a deep knowledge of several martial arts disciplines, but she's yet to show us the bloodthirsty finisher that's kind of required for real success in the UFC. Still, she suffocated pretty good opponents in Stephanie Egger, Vanessa Mello, and Maria Agapova, so the list of girls that could arguably beat her is growing shorter with each outing. Tracy takes her record to a solid 8-1, not losing since her professional debut. And at 26 years old, she's gonna be around for a while. But for me, she's just gotta be more violent. Either finish your opponent or leave him unrecognizable. So let's move on, there's no real winners here. Next up is a featherweight bout between Giga and Omar Morales. Chikadze wins this by unanimous decision, getting 30-27 on all scorecards. This was a fun fight with a couple of guys who were as ready to throw bombs as they were to taunt and jabber. The showmanship always makes a fight more fun for me, especially when it seems to be in good humor. These guys were smiling and talking, they were pointing at strikes landed and indicating coming strikes by tapping their elbows, and they were also displaying some karate poses. And the actual fight was fun too. Both fighters were throwing strikes to finish their opponents, but the strikes were coming pretty much one at a time. Morales comes into this fight as the undefeated favorite, but just couldn't get ahead. Giga was landing faster and getting out of the way. I don't remember Omar landing anything that really gave Giga problems. While Giga whelped up Morales' front leg, bloodied his face a bit, and even dropped him in the third. Despite his success, Giga was unable to get that elusive UFC finish again. He's now 4-0 in UFC competition, but all his wins are by decision. He usually hurts his opponents and really did go for the finish when Moraes was down, but he just hasn't figured out that part of the game yet. To be fair, he does have plenty of finishes on his resume, just not at the highest level. And this one seemed like a fight that he really should have finished. He had plenty of success, but either abandoned it or didn't turn up the pressure. Regardless, he is sitting pretty at 4-0 in the UFC and continues to climb the ladder. Moraes loses his first professional fight, but he does so in a different weight division, so I'm not sure if it's really going to affect his lightweight standings much. Again, it's hard to make my real winners list, and Giga's just going to miss it. So let's move on. There's no real winners here either. Next up is a bantamweight fight between Alkazi and Tony Kelly. Tony Kelly wins this one by unanimous decision with the scorecards of 30-27 and 2 of 29-28. This was one I was very much looking forward to. Both fighters having their second UFC fight after dropping their first, I knew they would both come out hungry. Plus, they kinda look like natural enemies. Alkazi kinda resembles one of those pale, fleshy, hairless nightwalkers we see in modern cinema, and Tony Kelly's stoic eyes and jawline would make him an incredible casting as a vampire hunter. Both of these guys had very exciting fights in their debuts. In fact, I had Tony Kelly making my real winners list even though he lost that first fight, which is not something I do very often. Well, this first round was strictly a grappling match, and it was awesome. Alkazi almost guillotined Kelly, and Kelly nearly snapped Alkazi's arm. In the second and third, the grappling was abandoned, and we saw pretty much a stand-up fight. When it did hit the ground, it was only strikes that were attempted. The most damaging attack in this fight was Kelly's knees, and probably won in the fight. Alkazi showed toughness and grit at many points, being forced to work through adversity and fogginess, but that's not to say that Kelly didn't have his share of hardships too. The ending of this fight was somewhat bizarre, as Alkazi appeared to be jubilantly celebrating with his opponent after 15 minutes of an exciting fight. But I guess he slapped Kelly a bit too hard, which prompted Tony to retaliate and scream a certain obscenity. But regardless of after-fight theatrics, this was a good one. It's a shame that Alkazi now finds himself at 0-2 in the UFC after 2 great outings, but someone has to lose the fight, but that doesn't mean he has to lose in my video. Both guys turned in a memorable performance, and I'm sure they both got a few more fans, but in such a close fight, it's hard to see either fighter making a case for a step up in competition. So let's move on. There's no real winners here either. Next up is a middleweight bout between Impa Kasanganay and Hakeem Buckley. Holy chocolate-covered donkey balls. You know I get excited. Dana, give the man 50 grand. Then go ahead and give him some royalty money too, because you know you're going to be playing the shit out of that KO. I'm just not past it yet. That's some real ninja shit. If you haven't seen it, go find the clip now. Like, pause this video and go. Buckley makes his sophomore appearance in the UFC and comes out looking like a stud. The first time around he went up against Kevin Holland on short notice. He made a good account of himself, even though he found himself on the end of a rather long straight right. In my real winners and losers video of that event, I mentioned that Buckley has some real potential, but needed an opponent more at his level. And now we see what happens when you give him that. This was an exciting fight before the spinning taekwondo kick, but that finish is the icing on the cake. And the sprinkles and candles and ice cream on the side too. Hakeem Buckley gets his first UFC win, gives Kasanganay his first loss, and gives us our first finish of the night. He's also now the proud owner of one of the nastiest finishes in UFC history. Like many others, I was already on board with this dude, but I'm sure he's got a lot of new converts tonight. Hakeem Buckley, my man. Big winner. We move up to the heavyweight division for a fight between Chris Daukaus and Rogerio Nascimento. Chris Daukaus wins this one by a first-round KO in only 45 seconds. In the introductions, I was surprised to see Daukaus as the underdog, much less this big of one. In fact, I was still explaining to my daughter that Daukaus was being underrated when he dropped that first bomb. Then all those other bombs landed too. Daukaus is showing what we already knew. Speed kills. It doesn't matter what division you're talking about. If you can get to your opponent before they get to you, 9 times out of 10, you win. His UFC debut was against Parker Porter a few months ago, and there too he was the vastly undersized fighter, but the exponentially quicker one. Most of our most dominant heavyweights have been on the lighter side, and Daukaus is fitting the mold. I keep talking about this, but it's important to look good in the heavyweight division right now, and Daukaus is looking spectacular. And I can't wait to see what's in store for the not-so-big man. Chris Daukaus, big winner. Next up is a middleweight bout between Tom Breeze and KB Buehler. Nice and easy for Tom Breezy. He gets this one done with a first-round TKO in just 1:42. This was impressive. Not a very long fight, and not a whole lot of effort expended, because pretty much every strike found the mark. He lost the fight earlier this year, and the fight before that, although it was a win, was over 2 years ago. And now Tom's back in a big way. With no strikes or damage absorbed, let's hope we get to see him again soon. This fight was just so short that we didn't get to see a whole lot, other than his statuesque specimen. Looking like an athlete and a killer, this dude's got the moves. Tom gets back in the win column and welcomes the undefeated KB Buehler to the UFC with a nice breezy Octagon nap. He's looking like the fighter we know he can be. T Breezy, big winner. First fight of the main card is a featherweight bout between Yusuf Salah and Elia Tapia. Elia Tapia wins this one by unanimous decision with the scorecards of 29-28 across all three. Tapia makes his UFC debut and puts the entire featherweight division on notice. He can punch, he can take a punch, but this guy's submissions are really special. We've got another decision here, but it comes with a certain charm. If you're strictly a fan of stand-up fights, then you're probably going to want to skip this one. But if you like jiu-jitsu and grappling heavy matches, then this is a must-see. Tapia simply put on a clinic. Moving from position to position, submission to submission, he showed his knowledge, experience, and skill. He was never satisfied, always looking to advance his position. Salah got outclassed tonight and really didn't offer much resistance, except he didn't tap. And I've got to commend him for that. There were many times throughout the fight that I thought it was seconds from being over, but somehow Yusuf always found a way out. As good as Tapia looked, it was somewhat troubling to see him gas out so hard halfway through the third round. He nearly gave the whole fight away. This was a concern of mine entering the fight, as Tapia has never gone the distance before. At this level, he's gonna find it harder to submit his opponents and needs to be prepared for a full 15 minutes each time out. In his defense, this was a short notice fight, so I guess we'll give him the benefit of the doubt just this once. Tapia wins his UFC debut, he stays undefeated, and takes out the surging Yusuf Salah. Featherweight division, be on lookout. Elia Tapia, big winner. The second of 3 heavyweight bouts features Tom Aspinall and Ulembekov. Aspinall wins this one by a first-round TKO, only taking 1.5 minutes to get it. So this one was pretty fast and easy. Tom took care of business with little effort. He threw a few punches, took his opponent down, dropped a few elbows, and won the fight. 2-0 in the UFC with 2 first-round TKOs. It's going pretty good for the man. He's got the boxing, he's got the jiu-jitsu, and he's got the mentality. On a 5-fight win streak and running through his opposition, it would be easy to get comfortable and cocky. But Aspinall wants to take it slow, saying there's a lot left to learn. He's calling out Sergey Spivak again, so get well, Sergey, because you've got a date. As the biggest favorite on the night, Tom did exactly what was expected. Just a plain old win wouldn't be enough to land him in my real winners list, but this wasn't a plain old win. It was short-form domination. So, Tom Aspinall, big winner. Next up is the middleweight fight between Marcus Perez and Dricus du Plessis. Du Plessis gets this one with a first-round KO, but this was a little weird. Perez looked comfortable and eager and was putting a lot of pressure on du Plessis. Duplessis, though, looked anxious and a bit reserved at first. For the first couple of minutes, neither his punches or kicks were getting fully extended. Perez was keeping his distance, so Duplessis' attacks weren't even getting close. But those butterflies and nerves didn't last too long. Duplessis put his game face on and streaked across the octagon, finally throwing long punches. Perez was maybe a bit too comfortable because he got caught while throwing a spinning elbow. Perez drops his second in a row and is now 2-4 in the UFC. He does cut a pretty wicked joker, but much like the infamous villain, he's fun to watch, but will inevitably end up on the losing side. And he does so here again, landing Marcus Perez on my real losers list. Duplessis, though, makes good on his UFC debut and satisfies the hype. We've often seen a fighter rise to prominence in the UFC as the face of their nation, then be followed by several of their countrymen. England's Michael Bisping, Dagestan's Khabib Nurmagomedov, and we may have another with South Africa's Dricus du Plessis. I'm hoping this will pave the road for other South African fighters to make their way to the UFC, but it's clear that Dricus du Plessis makes his arrival with an entire nation at his back. Another middleweight contender has entered the ranks, and it's gonna get interesting. Dricus du Plessis, big winner. Our third and final heavyweight bout of the night features Ben Rothwell and Marcin Tybura. Tybura wins this one by unanimous decision, scoring 29-27 on all three scorecards. In my prediction video for this event, I called for a boring decision out of the big men. I also called it for Rothwell, so I was wrong on 2 of 3 accounts. Tybura got the win, and this wasn't boring. The first 2 rounds were pretty close and very entertaining. Both guys were just walking towards each other and throwing. The third was much more lopsided and didn't provide the same entertainment as both the fighters were obviously fatigued. It's hard for these big guys to go 15 minutes. As entertaining as this fight was, the only thing we really learned is that Big Ben is getting closer to retirement. He won the first round but gave up momentum not due to absorbed damage, but because he kept getting more and more tired. I'm not sure how much longer he can compete at this level. We saw 2 different heavyweights raise their stock earlier, but we didn't see it here. It was fun, but let's move on. There's no real winner here. Co-main event features featherweights Edson Barboza and Makwan Amirkhani. Barboza wins this one by unanimous decision, scoring 30-26, 30-27, and 29-28. Barboza makes his second fight at featherweight and this time makes good in the new division. Edson looked good here, hurting his opponent with kicks and quick punches, and is able to stave off most of Amirkhani's takedowns too. As is often the case, the scorecards vary a bit, with one looking rather silly. One judge scores at 30-26, obviously giving Barboza a 10-8 in the third round. I can see that. Edson dropped him a few times in that round and showed some dominance. The second judge scored at 30-27, a bit more traditional. Again, no argument here. Edson pretty clearly won all 3 rounds. He definitely won the stand-up battle, didn't give up many takedowns, and had Amirkhani in several submissions along the way too. Then we've got that third judge who scored the fight 29-28. I have no idea which round he gave to Amirkhani. We see this way too often and it sucks. These judges need to be better trained and held more accountable. Well, Edson is back in the win column and he's poised to climb the featherweight rankings. He says the lightweight division is too contender heavy and sees a more probable path to the title here. He's probably right about that, but if Edson's going to get to the top, I feel like we need to see a tad bit more. Getting back on track, Edson is obviously a winner tonight, but as I've mentioned, I've got some pretty high standards for this list. A superstar like Barboza needs finishes, and he seemed happy to outpoint his opponent through most of the night. He also allowed the last several seconds of the fight to go unused, throwing his hands up in victory well before the final bell sounded, and I just don't like to see that. I love Edson Barboza, and I know I'm being a bit of a stickler here, but all things considered, he's not going to make my list. Let's move on. The main event of the night is a bantamweight bout between number 1 contender Marlon Moraes and number 4 Corey Sandhagen. Corey wins this one by a second round TKO, and he came out like a man on a mission. Pre-fight, Corey was saying that Moraes was a perfect matchup for him, and it didn't take long to see what he meant. Moraes typically starts his attacks from distance, but Sandhagen's length kept Moraes too far away, but Sandhagen was still able to connect. He was obviously the longer fighter, but he was the faster fighter too. Early in the second round, Corey was able to hurt Moraes, and then kind of taunted him by verbally pointing out that his orbital was likely broken. This was an awesome tactic. Corey's corner didn't need the update. The call-out was to get in Marlon's head and make him focus on his own injury. It must have worked because Corey landed a spinning kick to Marlon's head shortly after. Marlon loses by TKO and loses his bid at the title. And with so many bantamweight contenders making their own claims, it may be a while before he finds himself in this position again. Now sitting at 1-2 over his last 3 fights, and that one win being quite controversial, he's going to drop a few rankings and lose that number 1 spot. All things considered, we got to call Marlon Moraes a big loser. Corey finishes this fight in a big way and makes a great argument to why he's truly one of the best in the world. Sandhagen looked amazing here, but maybe even more impressive is his down-to-earth mentality. We recently saw Paulo Costa get demolished, then start calling for a rematch, citing an injury, which made us all throw up in our mouths a little bit. When Corey got demolished by Aljamain, he took a very different and much more respectable approach, which culminated in an impressive win tonight. After the fight, when asked about his title hopes, Corey said that Aljamain deserved the shot first. You don't often see that kind of humility out of fighters, especially right after a big win, but it's awesome when we do. We're going to see Corey climb a few ranks in the next few days, likely ending up at the number 2 spot, and he deserves it. The bantamweight division is super stacked right now, and it just keeps on delivering. Corey Sandhagen, big winner. So there's my real winners and losers of UFC Fight Night, Moraes vs. Sandhagen. This was a great night of fights that produced one of my longest winners lists. Fight Island certainly has a way of delivering. And we've got a few more to go. Next week's event is headlined by Brian Ortega and the Korean Zombie, and it should be a good one too. I'll have a predictions video for that one soon, so be sure to check it out. And this week is also going to see the return of my little show, I Just Want to Talk. I've been busy lately and haven't had the time for it, but I'm hoping to deliver 2 new episodes this week. So hit the subscribe button so you can be notified of those videos releases and stay up to date with me and the MMA community. Till next time.